Hey guys, welcome back for part 2 of my shelf tour. Now, I don't think that this really needs very much lead in. If you missed my Stephen King one, I'll put it up here for you. That's where I felt like I needed to give that one some time to breathe since that's the biggest part of my collection. But if you count that out, obviously the biggest part of my collection is fantasy and sci-fi. So that's what we're going to talk about now, guys. So let's hit it. Okay, so let's kick things off with the first shelf. Obviously, this is some Brandon Sanderson signed art of Shalon Navarre from the Stormlight Archive. I just always loved that art when I opened the front cover of Words of Radiance, and I just thought it was beautiful, so I had it blown up and signed. Unfortunately, not in person. A friend of mine had to do it, had a death in the family, and I had to miss that signing. But he doesn't seem to be stopping anytime soon, so hopefully I'll see him again. And that leads me to the first shelf, which is mostly Brandon Sanderson stuff. Elantris, the leather-bound edition of Warbreaker, which is one of the most beautiful leather-bound editions I've ever seen in my life. The original Mistborn trilogy, the Era 2 Mistborn books. I guess there's one more coming. I'm just now making my way through that. I just talked about Alloy of Law the other day. The wonderful Stormlight Archive. November we get the fourth book, the long-awaited fourth book. Legion is the only one here. I don't plan to read anytime soon because I'm just doing the Cosmere for now. But I've read most of these. Arcanum Unbounded is a collection of many, I always say unbounding, it's unbounded, a collection of a lot of Brandon Sanderson short stories, including some that tie in with the Cosmere, obviously. Or these are the ones that do tie in with the Cosmere. Rolling on down here, my favorite fantasy series of all time, The Lord of the Rings. There is yes, believe it or not, it is a Funko Pop. I get that asked a lot. Is that a Funko Pop? Yes, it is. It's just huge. But some illustration. It's the only illustration book I like that isn't done by Alan Lee. Alan Lee is mostly pretty much everything I enjoy about Tolkien's world, but that's a pretty good one. The annotated edition of The Hobbit, which is just absolutely gorgeous. Now, what makes me want to do a reread, because I usually do a reread of Lord of the Rings about every 2 or 3 years. And last time I did it in 2018, I did not do The Hobbit, and I felt kind of bad about it. So when I got this new edition, I said, well, that gives me an excuse to go back and read The Hobbit with all the annotations in it. So it should be very exciting. My collector's edition of, I think it's the 50th anniversary edition of The Lord of the Rings. I believe you can still get it, but it's no longer in print. But it's I think between 50 and 80 bucks, depending on the condition, you can still find it out there. This is just a Tolkien pendant with his initials there. And, of course, my precious, the One Ring. This is from a bookmark. I get lots of comments all the time about my my bookmark that has Saruman on it. Same thing with this. When the movies were coming out, before we knew anything about them, it was just the first promotional materials. I was so excited. I bought just about anything that I could find, including those 2 bookmarks. And this one just says, the One Ring to rule them all phrase on it. And it actually has the One Ring on it. And I thought, yeah, that looks handsome enough. I'm not even going to use it. I'm just going to put it with the collection. I just got the stuff that Christopher Tolkien finished. I haven't actually read those before. So, Lord of the Rings content is coming on the channel here sooner than later. I was kind of waiting for the Amazon series, but they're taking too long, and I want to talk about some Tolkien on the channel. So I'll probably do first readings of those within the next year. I feel like C.S. Lewis goes with J.R.R. Tolkien like peanut butter and jelly, so I have to have them together. I love Narnia. I think it is one of those, I understand it's probably childhood nostalgia, and I'm okay with that when it comes to fantasy. I mean, that's why I love The Hobbit. Then you get on to H.P. Lovecraft, huge fan. Conan, I haven't read a ton of, but I think that Robert E. Howard is something that every fantasy lover should read. And of course, I love the bound edition of the original Robin Hood stories. Coming on down to the third shelf, we got the Harry Potter books, all first editions. I read those pretty much as they came out, and I want to say that the third book was the one that was brand new when I first got into it. So at the time, I was still like, oh, these are stupid kids' books. I'm too cool for that. And I was like, well, you know what? I know people my age are reading these. I'm going to go ahead. So kids got this for me for Christmas because I'm reading him the series slowly, like a chapter a night before bed. We're working our way through Goblet of Fire right now. And yes, that is a Gryffindor bookmark. Or actually, it's not. It's Sirius Black, the Grimm. So Prisoner of Azkaban, my favorite Harry Potter book. And then moving along to one of my favorite series that's going right now and that's Pierce Brown's Red Rising. Guys, if you haven't read this series, please do yourself a favor. It gets so misrepresented as YA, and I think if someone reads this expecting YA, they're going to be shocked, because it is not YA. It's very, very brutal, very violent. And in fact, I argue still that each book gets darker and darker until you get to the aptly named Dark Age, which is straight up feels like Joe Abercrombie ghost wrote that book for Pierce Brown. That's how dark it is. So I love this series, and I won't ever stop talking about it. I stopped doing individual reviews because seriously, they were getting like 300 views. So I didn't continue with Iron Gold and Dark Age. But I want to revisit this series. My wife's reading it through now after like 6 months of my nagging at her. And she read the first 2 books in a couple of days. That's how much she's enjoying it. So yeah, I definitely want to talk about when book 6 comes out. I'm considering a reread because they don't take very long to read. Moving on down. I am starting Robin Hobb next year. Part of my big reads are Malazan and the Realm of the Eldlings. I've only committed to Farseer. I want to see how I like it first before I commit to doing, another 18-book series. But this edition was just way too handsome to pass up. Actually, book 2 is that Royal Assassin, I believe. It comes out later this week. But Amazon ship times are still slow because of that whole virus that shall not be named right now. Night Angel, a series I did not really like, but I bought the the signed Ultimate Edition anyway, because that's just guys, that's just what happens when you've got the sickness known as book collecting. Lightbringer, one of the series I thought was probably the best magic system not written by Brandon Sanderson, maybe ever. I think the magic system in that is really, really special. I still haven't read the last book because I thought books 1 and 2 were absolutely amazing. Book 3, I kind of saw some cracks in that foundation, and book 4 really pissed me off, for lack of a better word, so I haven't finished Burning White. But you don't read 4 giant Stephen King's The Stand-sized tomes like that and not read the last book, so I'm going to. The most hated fantasy series in the fantasy community for whatever reason, Inheritance. I've read... I can't go too far because I have never finished it. But I've read way worse fantasy than this, so I don't understand why it gets all the crap that it does. But again, that is coming from someone who has never finished it. I've tried to read it twice, and I've got stuck in Eldest both times. And I don't know why. But damn it, someday it's going to happen. And coming down to the bottom here is kind of the leftovers. This is just a group of movie maps. Thought it was a really neat idea. It just big movies like Lord of the Rings, things like that, where it brings the maps to you. And I love maps. I think I've got probably 3 or 4 different types of maps that I have framed. I just don't have room for. I even have one of Skyrim. The Grimm Company, don't know a ton about. It's got lots of first law comparisons. Yes, I have the Patrick Rothfuss stuff, even though I know you guys don't understand why I'm not a big fan. It is what it is. And Prince of Nothing, which I haven't started. And of course, my original version of The Hobbit, which I just can't bear to get rid of. Have had it for far too long. And that takes us to the next shelf. If you guys aren't getting the method here, I try to put the framed art for whatever I've got the most of on that shelf. Obviously, this one is for the Wheel of Time. I love that logo so much, and that's why I've got it there too. Yes, I have all these in hardcover. 11 out of the 14 are first editions. Some are in better shape than others. Some I paid way more than I want to admit. But yeah, if you've been on the channel before, you know that I was doing my first reading of Wheel of Time. Had a blast with it. Really enjoyed my time talking with all the wheelies. I'm going to keep calling them wheelies. Deal with it. And yeah, I recommend that you guys read Wheel of Time if you like fantasy, because I mean it's one of the granddaddies, I think, and everyone should read it. Then we got the Books of Earthsea by Ursula K. Le Guin. I had someone actually comment really, really snarky on my channel. Why do you got Earthsea front face on your shelf when you haven't even read it? Well, it doesn't actually fit. That's why, and I don't want it sticking out that far, so that's why I front faced it. Anyway. Poppy Wars should be happening sometime next year, more likely. The 3rd book comes out this fall, but it comes out the same time as Brandon Sanderson's Rhythm of War, so that wasn't going to happen. The shelf where I will gripe a lot, because, guys, I was reading A Song of Ice and Fire before anyone had even heard of Game of Thrones, before HBO had even bought the rights to it. I was a fan of this series, so my anger with George R. R. Martin, I feel like is more earned than the people who never read a book. before the series came out, and then after they read it after the series came out, and they're complaining about how long they've been waiting. Oh, Cry Me a River. I've been waiting a millennia. So anyway, here's my Iron Throne and my House Dark badge. They aren't connected. It's just, I thought it was cool. And Thakett's Grey Wind. I'm not sure. This was before they actually sold Game of Thrones merchandise, and I got it at a con. Rage of Dragons, just because I didn't have anywhere else to put it. I've actually got an advanced reader copy of Book 2, and I haven't really got that far into it yet. Trying to finish the Dresden Files. Moving on down. Haven't read the 5 Warrior Angels yet by Brian Lee Durfee. He sent those to me signed. He's a friend of the channel. And I'm going to do it, Brian. I'm sorry. It's going to happen. Don't worry about it. He tells me, hey, don't worry about it. I just wanted to donate to your beautiful shelf. And I appreciate that because they are gorgeous looking books. The Demon Cycle. I'm halfway through it. Should be starting Skull Throne sometime later this summer or this fall. And guys, you're going to hear me say a lot. I haven't read this yet. The Crimson, is it called Crimson Empire by Alex Marshall? Just got those on my last book haul. Haven't read them. And a lot of questions I get is, why do you buy so many books if you don't plan to read them right now? Well, guys, if you understand book collecting, you understand that you're not going to stop reading anytime soon, so why stop buying books? It's just, that's why it's called a problem. Poe, I'm going to talk about these in October. Same with Dracula. I'm going to be doing Horror Month in October. Horror doesn't do crazy numbers on the channel, but that's okay. It's October. I feel like that's the time that people are more willing to give horror stuff a try, and I think that everyone can appreciate something like Edgar Allan Poe, because, I mean, it's Poe, right? Coming on down here to the bottom. Yes, I'm a Beatlemaniac. The anthology is the best Beatles, anything that you can get that tells you about everything. Here's a nice little graphic novel of The Hobbit. I was trying to get my kid to read it, and he thought that the print was too small on it. He might not be wrong. So he was like, oh, it's just too much to read. So, he's still more into the pictures than the books, or having me read to him. Right here, we got Gone with the Wind. This is the oldest book that I own. I want to say it's a 4th printing from like the 40s or maybe the 50s. I'm not exactly sure. I'm too scared to open it and look at it. I'm afraid it's going to fall apart. But yeah, that was a gift from my brother. Really, really cool. Yeah, I think it's a wonderful story. His Dark Materials I haven't read. I've heard so much about it, especially the ending. Liza Locklamore, I think if you're a fan of this channel, you know that I fell on the very small minority that wasn't nuts about it, enough that I didn't continue reading them. But I will someday. I didn't just hold it in disdain. I was expecting the world after the way that it was sold to me, and I think that might not have been able to meet the hype. Here's a couple series I haven't picked up yet. I got them last month. That is the Wounded Empire by R.J. Barker and the Traitor's Son Cycle by Miles Cameron. And let's go to the next one. If this is your first trip to the channel, you don't know that I love the First Law series by Joe Abercrombie. I think it is probably my favorite fantasy series not named The Lord of the Rings. Therefore, it is my favorite modern fantasy series. It's not for the faint of heart. It's very brutal. It's very dark. Grim dark, actually, is what it's filed under. But fantastic if you love just great characters. And that's why I have the art of it here. And, of course, the Joe Abercrombie shelf. Next, the new book comes out in September. It's book 2 of a sequel trilogy. So these are book club editions. They're all I could find on hardcover. And they weren't cheap. I'll just leave it at that. But that's why they're smaller, and that's why I don't have them front face because of that. Because, I mean, the blade itself should be the one that I would front face, but it just looked weird when I had a small book front faced. Anyhow, and that's really all I can say. I haven't read his, what are these called? Shattered Sea books yet, because they're YA, and it's a tough sell for me on YA. But it's Joe Abercrombie, so it's going to happen next year. I have it on the schedule. Sword of Shannara is really as far as I got in that series. I think I got into the second series and just wasn't for me. But that was as a preteen. I haven't read these since I was like 12. So I don't really know how they hold up. So can't say much about that. The Vampire Chronicles. I was a huge Anne Rice fan in high school. I loved the Vampire Chronicles. I feel like a lot of people don't remember. I talked about this when I talked about Salem's Lot by Stephen King. Is that people don't remember a time when vampires were still scary. They think now that vampires are sexy. Back then, man, vampires were absolutely terrifying. And unfortunately, her series became terrifying for the wrong reasons. I made it about halfway through Merrick before I abandoned the series. And I'm such a collector, though, I kept going. So I've still got all those. I want to say that Minmuck is actually signed. And that was when I actually met her at a Barnes & Noble. Nice lady. H.G. Wells, I love the classics, The Time Machine and The Invisible Man, some of the greatest books ever written. The Motley Crue book, The Dirt, is probably the most fun I've ever had reading a book. I don't read much nonfiction. If I do, it's usually going to be biographies, and I usually prefer to do those on music artists because they have the best stories. Down here we got a little sci-fi. Ender's Game. Besides Dune, that's my favorite science fiction book ever written. And then The Expanse, which I think is just a wonderful, wonderful modern science fiction series that a lot of people have discovered through the Sci-Fi and Amazon series. But the books are every bit as good as that show is, and I'd say that the show is every bit as good as the books are. It's very, very fact-based science. It's about, in the near future. I talked about it in my Why You Should Read, but I think that what differentiates it from a lot of the science fiction out these days is that they don't ignore the facts of science. Quantum physics are very, very important in that. So if it's something that you don't imagine we could physically do within 100 years, it's probably not in there. There is no cheating gravity or propulsion or anything like that in this book. And this, of course, is the cup that James Holden has on the Rocinante. Graphic novel of Star Wars, because, the original trilogy is life. Coming on down here. A couple more series. We're doing a read-along of what are these called? The Greatcoats. Thank you. The Greatcoats is what that series is called. Doing a read-along of those starting in August. Look for a video on that soon where I'll be talking about that in more detail. Anna Smith Spark is just someone who's been highly recommended to me. Haven't gotten to him yet. Ryra, I'm about halfway through that. Wonderful. I really enjoyed Theft of Swords. I think that Michael J. Sullivan is kind of like John Gwynne in the fact that I feel like he's brought traditional fantasy to a modern setting, and it's really, really appreciated. And you have to read it to understand what that means. Tad Williams, I haven't gotten the Dragonbone chair. I know everybody's going to tell me how good it is. It's just a numbers game right now. Shadow of What We Lost, the Lacanius trilogy, was intending to get read this fall, but I think it got bumped for our Greatcoats read-along. So it is what it is. Book 3 hasn't come out in trade paperback yet. That's why I don't have that one yet. And of course, Daniel Abraham, one half of the guy who writes The Expanse. So I was interested to see how he wrote fantasy. And finally on the bottom, my man Michael Crichton. Huge Michael Crichton fan. If you didn't catch my Why You Should Read Michael Crichton, I recommend you check it out. I think he is one of the most underrated authors going because it just seems like his stuff's almost being forgotten about. And this guy was incredible. Just hit after hit after hit on TV and in books. The guy was just a juggernaut, and I think he needs to be appreciated more. And of course, the Millennium Trilogy, The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, is what most people know the series as. I'm only a third through it, but I really, really enjoyed that first book. I think Elizabeth is awesome. And let's go to the last shelf. We kick it off by talking about my favorite book of all time, Frank Herbert's Dune. I love this book more than I can explain, and I have people all the time ask me, Mike, why haven't you done a Why You Should Read on Dune? And then because I think it's a book that's so divisive that I don't think I'm going to do a Why You Should Read on it. I might do like a Why I Love It, because I can't recommend it to everybody because it's not a book for everybody. It's not like an Ender's Game where I think anybody can enjoy it. It's not your typical science fiction book. It kind of straddles that fine line between science fiction and fantasy. And it just has so many themes and philosophical choices for the reader to make up their own mind about that. It's just, I'll get more into it when I cover that. I plan on doing that when the movie gets closer. Right now I'm waiting to see if that movie gets delayed because of the virus that shall not be named. So stay tuned for that. I do intend to talk about Dune, also Dune Messiah and Children of Dune, up to God Emperor, and we'll see what happens with Heretics and Chapter House. Witcher, I should be continuing this series here soon. I've done lots of Witcher content on the channel on the run-up to the Netflix series. Read the first 3, if you count the 2 short story books. I should be starting Time and Contempt. I took a voters poll, and that's the series that people most want me to continue, is The Witcher. So I should be starting Time and Contempt probably early this summer. Down here we got The Belgariad, which I planned on starting next year. Douglas Adams' Hitchhiker's Guide, probably the funniest books I've ever read in my life. Douglas Adams was a genius. Every sentence ends in a joke. It's great. Glenn Cook's The Black Company is unfortunately one of those that has just been kicked down the road for as long as I can remember. Kind of like Robin Hobb. Robin Hobb has been on my TBR since high school. Same with these. I was actually planning to do it in 2021, and then Malazan blew it away in that voters poll. So that's why I'm going with Malazan. I'm currently working my way through the John Gwynne books. I feel like John Gwynne is the hidden gem of modern fantasy. This man is brilliant. I feel like this series, Faithful and the Fallen, should be talked about by everybody. And it seems like no one has read it. I'm about a third through the final book right now. And it's one of those things. It's tough for me to finish because I love this universe. I love these characters so much. I don't want to say goodbye to them, and that's how good it is. And it's a series I feel like he could have probably bunched out into 5 to 7 books, but he didn't, and the series is better for it. I cannot recommend it enough. And this is the sequel books, which take place in the same land, but years later. So I don't know if I'll be reading those immediately or not. Then we go to my high school years, guys. The Star Wars EU. Yes, it is now referred to as Star Wars Legends. I will always consider it canon. I consider the new stuff to be Earth 2, if you will. The Star Wars EU was something that was so dear to me, starting with the Thrawn trilogy. When that series came out, it completely revitalized my love for Star Wars, because Star Wars was basically dead before those books came out. And a lot of people give these books credit for George deciding to finally fund and make the prequel series. So regardless how you feel about that, these books, no one can deny how the shot in the arm that this gave Star Wars. It was dead in the mid-90s, and that really brought them back. And it just continued. In high school, it was like every 3 months, I think, a New Jedi Order book came out. And I'm going to be talking about New Jedi Order by itself here soon, and why you should read it. I think that the New Jedi Order is when Star Wars grew up. You know, it was a time when Star Wars said, okay, we've done everything we can do with the Empire. We need a new villain. We need to realize that sometimes heroes die. And it really was. It was the change that I felt Star Wars needed. And then you get into Legacy of the Force and ending with the Fate of the Jedi, which I did not read. And that's because I was heartbroken when they killed the EU. And the thing was, at the time, I was okay with it. I understood that they didn't want to be tied to it, but I thought it was going to be like the MCU, where they were still going to pull from it, not just completely scrap it and ignore everything in it. And I think that's the big mistake that they've made. But I've talked in depth about that. I don't want to do that here. Then the big read in 2021, Malazan, the Book of the Fallen. This is a series that has intimidated the hell out of me for years. What I said in my Wheel of Time stuff is I felt like Wheel of Time was getting your undergrad or your bachelor's degree, and this is your PhD. Getting your PhD or your doctorate in fantasy is reading Malazan. I'm impressed. I've got so many people on the channel that want to read along with me. That starts in January. I'm going to be talking about Great Coats and Malazan here in a couple days, about those channel read-alongs, if you want to join us. Because the more, the merrier in that warband, because that is a beast of a series. Catcher in the Rye, mixed feelings on it. To Kill a Mockingbird, absolutely incredible book. And then what I'm working on right now, Dresden Files, I am almost caught up with you guys. About 180 pages in cold days, so I should be finishing that soon. I'll read the short stories once I'm caught up. I'm trying to make sure that I'm caught up before Peace Talks comes out in July, and in another paperback copy of Gone with the Wind, because it's just that good. This is the one that I actually read, and that one is the one that I will not read because I don't want to hurt it. Okay, guys, that's it. I'm sure it's a collection that will continue to grow, but as you can see, I'm running out of shelf space again, so things will probably slow down, but I've been saying that since like December. If you watch my book haul videos, you know that doesn't always happen. But again, I love collecting books. I love talking about them. I probably could have talked about these for a lot longer than I actually did. So if you want to hear more about anything, drop in the comments. Let me know what you want to hear about, and go ahead and let me know how you feel about your collection. Are you going to catch up with me anytime soon? Are your collection better than mine? Drop me a comment, drop me a link, anything that you want to talk about, hit me in the comments and I will talk to you there.